Hello and welcome to another episode of The Making of. I'm excited to be sitting here today with Bart Layton, writer, director, and producer of Crime 101. Bart, welcome to the show.
Matt, thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. So I just want to also mention that this stars Mark Ruffalo, Chris Hemsworth, Halle Berry, Barry Keoghan, Nick Nolte, Jennifer Jason Leigh. The list goes on and on. So first of all, fantastic for getting all these actors in this film. It was a real ensemble piece. So backing up, how did this come to you? How did you take this on?
How did it start?
Yeah.
Well, I got sent the short story by Don Winslow, which the movie is based on. And it was like dead of winter in the UK, like January in London is like not so much fun. And this was like, so the short story was set all along the Pacific Coast Highway. And, you know, there's this string of robberies taking place. And the only kind of connection which Ruffalo's character figures out is that they are all happening very close to the freeway. But there was just something about the kind of sun-bleached quality of it. It felt like pure escapism. And I remember reading it and thinking, you know, getting like 2/3 of the way through and thinking, this is really good. If the ending is as good as the first, like 2/3, it could be incredible. And then the ending has this wicked twist, which I would love to take credit for, and I can't. But I literally read that, like, I don't know if I even got to the last couple of lines, and I called my agent in LA, and it's like ringing until it was like, obviously, the small hours in LA, and I was like, I've got to do this, I've got to. And there was obviously a bidding war, and I wasn't like a big shot writer, so, and I guess I sort of, you know, I pitched my vision for it. I think I thought it had the makings of one of those sort of classic movies that we grew up in love with. You know, there are those movies we all remember, whether it's Heat, Collateral, you know, like, and even going back to the 70s and 80s, you know. And I just thought if I was ever going to make a biggish movie, it would want to be one of those, you know, where you get this great night out, but also there's substance to it. So yeah, that was the start. And then it took me a long time to write, and obviously from a short story to a big movie it's a lot of work.
Well, that's a good segue, literally my next question, because our podcast reaches and attracts a lot of up-and-comers, students, you know, people getting in the game. How do you go about writing?
So I didn't really, you know, I'm not terribly experienced. You know, I wrote American Animals. Before that, I'd worked in documentary. I think if you work in docs, you develop a very good sense for structure, because half the time with docs, you just don't have, like most true stories do not have a neat 3-5-act Hollywood structure. So you get very good at trying to fit this sort of smear of human activity into something very gripping. And I think, you know, my process is really one of, with this, I did a kind of very detailed beat sheet. Like I just started writing and I was like, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then, and because it was 3 characters and at times 4, when you put Barry Keoghan's character into on a collision course, you're kind of trying to get this rhythm of like keeping that momentum going between one character and another, and not having the audience feel like, oh, I was enjoying that movie and now I'm in this movie. So it's like a musical piece. You have to get that rhythm. And I actually ended up being very close. When I wrote the script, it ended up incredibly close to the beat sheet. I think I'm pretty good at a first draft. I'm much less good at all subsequent drafts because I find it hard to tear up. But I think if you get that, you know, if you're doing your kind of beat sheet and that's a sort of paragraph, this is what happens in the scene, and then if brilliant bits of dialogue come into your mind, whack them down as well, because you might forget them, and then just keep going, and then you kind of leave it for a bit, if you can, and come back to it and go, what can I lose? What can I live without? And then the tighter that beat sheet gets, then you're off to the races because you've got a really good plan when you start the screenplay, and you kind of know where you're going. And I think it's difficult if you don't have that superstructure. I think it's hard to. Well, personally, I would find it hard just to kind of write without a blueprint.
Yep. Well, I got to say, I mean, honestly, no, not just talk here. I mean, this is one of the best LA movies I've seen in a while.
Great.
I was going to ask you if you had influences, Heat.
Yeah, I sort of feel. I mean, look, it's very difficult to make a LA cop and robber kind of movie without the shadow of Heat, and of course, and I remember seeing that movie and just loving every second of it. I think I wanted a slightly more kind of like a warmer, you can't get much warmer than Heat, but like warmer in terms of the characters. Like I felt like I wanted the characters to be a little bit more accessible, so that they weren't impenetrable. I guess the thinking was that if you can really develop characters that feel relatable, so they're not like, so Hemsworth's character, he's not like the James Bond of Jewel Thieves. He's flawed and he has issues and he's not perfect. And I think that the effect of that is probably that as an audience you're more in it, like you're really connected in, you care deeply about them, and so that was, and I guess that made me reflect more on some of those movies of the 70s, some of the Steve McQueen movies, but also, there was The French Connection, there was, Billy Friedkin's films, there was Live and Die in LA from the 80s. All of those I felt were touchstones. And then when it came to the action stuff, I wanted it not to get too movie, like it still had to be grounded so that you felt the rush and the kind of visceralness of like, what would it really be like? Yeah. If you or I found ourselves in a car chase, what would that really feel like?
Yeah.
So that was the kind of methodology for some of that stuff.
Did you shot everything in LA? I just want to ask that kind of.
Yeah, that for me was like non-negotiable. That the LA, there are pros and cons. The pros being you get the best crew in the world, and we really had them in every department. But it's really expensive, and no one really is that excited if you're shooting on their block. It's like, really?
Yeah.
But the idea for me of doing it with, like, we were going to shoot like Australia or South Africa or Canada for LA, I was like, that was never going to happen. So we shot almost all of it there. We came to the UK. We went to the UK to do some interiors, like, there was practical things, like I wasn't going to be able to take over the whole top floor of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in LA, so we built that, and that was epic, and also because there's guns and there's all sorts of practical things. So most of everything that you see that's location is LA, and then a few studio bits in London. Yeah,
what a blast!
Yeah, it was wild, and when you are shooting something like like a high octane car chase, you have to have people who are technically the best in the business and at the very cutting edge of what we could do. And we built technologies to put like a handheld camera in the car with Chris. So when you see what looks like Chris Hemsworth driving at 80 miles an hour down Lancashire Boulevard, narrowly avoiding oncoming cut, that really is Chris Hemsworth doing that. In addition to the best stunt drivers in the world, but we built things that would allow us to put you in the action.
I think we have one more question, but this is kind of zooming out here for a lot of people listening. I ask everybody.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for students, up-and-comers, filmmakers, maybe that are independent, that, it's not an easy path, and any recommendations?
So, I mean, I never went to film school. I feel like there are... I did have the good fortune of doing the Sundance Labs. That was life-changing. I think if there are filmmakers out there who are on there, like they've made a short film or they've written a script and they have a voice and they feel like they are in need of that kind of support, then definitely applying to the Sundance Labs is, it's very competitive, but it's an incredible thing. But I also think, and I'm sure other people say this, and I say this a lot to documentary people, is like, we are now all walking around with these devices which actually are legit. My daughter just made a documentary. She shot the whole thing on her iPhone. She's a teenager, and it's pretty good. So I think, that, doing that and then trying to edit it, you're going to learn a lot quickly. I remember Robert Redford said to us when we were at the Sundance Labs, he was like, the best thing you can do here is fail. Make a mistake, because there's nothing at stake, right? And so the more that people are getting out with their mates and doing stuff and shooting stuff, and then they get in the edit and they're like, oh, that's what I did wrong. So I think that, and also, there are certain movies which I come back to again and again, which are examples of like what I think are tonally expressions of the kinds of things that I want to do. Dog Day Afternoon is a movie I come back to a lot because it has it's broad comedy at times, it's high drama, and it's tragedy all in one, and you kind of can't believe. So I think looking at things where you're like, oh, movies, it doesn't have to just be that. It's not just a horror movie or just a comedy or just a drama. It tonally you can have that great experience of mixing those. So I guess that is probably the best. I'm sure as soon as you leave, I'll be like, oh, and there's this practical suggestion. But look, I never had the qualifications to do a lot of the stuff I've done. So I would say most of the obstacles are kind of in here. And if you just go, well, let me give that a go. Let me do that. Let me make that short documentary. Next thing you know, you might be at Sundance with it or something.
Thank you so much.
Mate, it's a pleasure. Thanks for your enthusiasm.